Grimwick the Demon Cat. Book 3, The Tournament. Chapter 19, The Rest of Round 1. Norbert's mind floated above his body. He could see Arthur on the ground, bewildered and angry for being pushed off the arena stage. The air was filled with energy of the crowd as they chanted Norbert's name. Norbert snapped back to reality when Professor Vine gave him a nudge. Enough showboating, Mr. Soot. Act like you've been here before. You didn't exactly win in a landslide either, so put your ego aside and get some medical attention before your next round. It looks like you need it. Norbert wobbled off the stage and towards the tunnel. A nurse was waiting in the tunnel when he arrived. Norbert collapsed on the bench near the nurse. Another nurse materialized to help Arthur as he approached the tunnel, but Arthur pushed them away and skulked down the corridor. The nurse offered Norbert a friendly smile. "Well fought, Norbert," he said. Norbert blushed. "Thank you," the nurse sighed. "I can't do much for your depleted magic reserves, only time will help you there. But I can heal your bruises and what I suspect are some cracked bones." The nurse gave Norbert a potion to drink and put their hand towards Norbert, and a blue light washed over Norbert. It was like entering a hot spring after hiking all day on a frigid mountain. Norbert rolled his shoulders back. He'd even say he felt better. "I can even patch up your cat," the nurse offered as he reached towards Grimwick. Grimwick hissed and the nurse recoiled. "It'll feel good, Grimwick," Norbert offered. "No. I like the feeling of being sore. Now come on, I want to watch the next match." Norbert offered his thanks to the nurse and hustled after Grimwick. When they got to their student booth, Penelope and her opponent were already gone. Norbert noticed that Arthur was missing. Red offered him a slight wave, and so Norbert sat next to her. Penelope and her opponent were already on the marble stage in their battle stances, waiting for Vine to start the match. Vine waited a moment and dropped her hand to commence the match. Penelope didn't hesitate for a moment. Once Vine's arm had fully dropped, she punched the air, and from her hands erupted a gust of wind that lifted up her opponent and sent them flying off the stage. The mage landed flat on their back, out of breath and stunned that the fight ended so quickly. Penelope's opponent didn't even get one spell out. The crowd was speechless and then erupted into cheers. Penelope looked born for this. She radiated confidence and grace as she waved to the audience. "Show off," huffed Red. Another professor came up to grab the next two mages, and a few moments later Penelope joined the rest of the contestants in the box. "Nice job, Penelope," Norbert said. "Don't compliment her. She's our enemy," Grimwick hissed. "Thanks, Norbert, and I'm not your enemy, Grimwick. I'm your opponent." And she scratched the back of Grimwick's head like a domesticated pet. Grimwick in turn flipped out and tried to claw at her, but Norbert held the tiny demon back. "You did all right, I guess, but the wind gimmick won't work on me," Red said. "Oh, I've got a special plan for you, Red," Penelope smiled. "Well, you may not even get to use it. You have to get through Norbert and Tiny Claws over there," Red retorted. "Tiny Claws!" Grimwick yelled as he continued to kick and scream. Norbert just held the flailing cat up in the air until he tired out. Grimwick did actually quiet down when the next round began. He seemed to be studying each fight carefully. Though he'd never admit it, Norbert could tell Grimwick was impressed by Penelope. When Vine began the next match, each student erupted into power. One emitted some form of blue light that seemed to be a natural energy that encapsulated them like a cocoon. The other had lightning crackling around them as if they were the center of a storm. Both moved quick, and each strike created concussive pulses that cracked the arena's floor. The proctor's shield held back the debris from hitting the audience. Each strike was responded by an equal blow. This would be a match of luck and opportunity, and the one who wielded lightning seemed to have found that opportunity 10 minutes into the fight. Instead of casting a defensive spell, the lightning user used a spell to push himself towards his opponent's side. He grabbed their arm, charged his legs, and in a flurry did a flip in the air and slammed his opponent into the ground like a lightning strike. The opponent laid unconscious, and the crowd cheered in a thunderous applause. Two nurses materialized with a stretcher to take away the defeated and unresponsive student. "Well, looks like I'm up." Red stood up and walked towards the arena's corridor before the proctor materialized to summon her. Norbert shivered as he watched the student be taken away in a stretcher. That could easily be him. Even Penelope and Red would not pull any punches, and the other opponents seemed ruthless. Red stood at her designated position and stared up at the ceiling. That annoyed her opponent, which was probably why she did it. Or Red was already bored. Vine dropped her hand, and like the previous rounds, Red's opponent wasted no time and attacked first, immediately firing some kind of yellow orb at Red. Red was still looking up at the ceiling when a giant rock wall rose from the ground. The orb collided with the wall, and in the explosion its force cracked the stone's facade, but the wall didn't fall apart. For something such a large rock, Red didn't even seem to move a muscle. Furthermore, she appeared to have complete control over the stone, as there were cracks that lined the entire stone, and yet it stayed in one piece. In a confident motion, Red swung her hand up, and the wall broke into hundreds of pieces that hurtled towards Red's opponent. Red's opponent just managed to block the impact of the rocks. The rocks clearly stung, as Red's opponent winced trying to cast another spell, but the rocks at their feet were beginning to reform and take new shapes. One turned into mud and leapt onto the opponent's hand, and as they tried to shake it off, more mud latched on top of them. In a few moments, Red's opponent was entombed in a sarcophagus of mud, just with a spot for their face to poke through. Vine approached the mud tomb and waited a moment to see if Red's opponent could break free. When the count was over, Red was declared the victor. She didn't even wave to the crowd like Penelope, she just walked off the stage, leaving Vine to dig out Red's frustrated opponent. Norbert clapped and hollered for Red. He only got louder when Grimwick tried to stop him, but it was Penelope's words that made him pause. "Well, Norbert, it looks like we're up next, and I can't wait to wipe the floor with you and your little cat." Penelope scratched Grimwick's head again as she walked past and headed towards the arena's tunnel. Grimwick ran after her, trying to come up with his best insults. Away from the sight of spectators, Grimwick was able to walk upright and jumped as he was trying to argue with Penelope. She just stood straight and looked down at him with a competitive smile. Norbert could see the temperament both of them had. Strong, proud, brave, confident. He felt none of these characteristics. His entire semester he felt out of place, and particularly in this tournament. But seeing what the other contestants could do, he knew he was out of their league. But even still, he wanted something more for himself. Grimwick was determined to win this tournament, and part of Norbert didn't want to disappoint him. So he tried to walk as confidently as he could towards the arena. But once the corridor opened and he was in the middle of the arena, he felt very, very small. And up next in the Grimwick the Demon Cat, Chapter 20, Penelope versus Norbert.